you very much indeed. Thank you, Barbara. So it's a hard act to follow Joanna McGregor and a hard act to step in for Adele Patrick, whose apologies Barbara has passed on. But it's wonderful to be able to continue supporting the New Hall Art Collection for a while. And we've been talking about anxiety, and I've been feeling that for the last 36 hours until I met these two. And now I feel completely confident. They have got to do twice as much work, but I have no concerns, and neither should you, about their ability to hold an entire session on their own. I hope Barbara has explained sort of why me. I am a curator by my history. And recently, as somebody who's spending her time writing, I've been looking a lot at the role of women dealers between the wars. And leading on from that a little bit, the women arts administrators, long before the word curator became something that you did with your lunch, never mind an art collection, there were administrators. And these women were, in many, many cases, fairly invisible. They did not aspire to the star quality. They were supporting the artists. And I'll just take one of them, because a recent biography has been written about her, is Dorothy Moorland. I'd be surprised if you know who she was, but I would be very much more surprised if you didn't know some of the men involved in setting up and running the ICA. She was the longest-serving director. She was the mother of pop art, and she is being brought back, I hope, into visibility. The dealers that I've been looking at were universally white women, but very few of them brought up in Britain. Some were European emigres, Jewish, non-Jewish. Many were brought up in what they would have called the British Empire. They were not all queer, but a lot of them were. They were all difficult. And they also were in the forefront, one of them only working outside of London, Lucy Wertheim. They were all in the forefront of a new way of being a dealer. That is not running an antique shop with old masters or contemporary art, but a place where a dealer acted as the agent, the nanny, the pimp, as John Russell wrote. There's a wonderful definition of what a dealer was in his book, Private View. And women, and I'm thinking of Erica Browson at the Hanover Gallery, above all, learnt to do this and helped to establish a way of working with artists that has been more or less prevalent until maybe the crash. This taking care, doing everything for the sainted artist. Largely men, because those women did not in any way privilege women artists. Another topic. But it's where I come from. I'm not a dealer, never have been, but I am a curator and somebody whose role has been to support artists. And there is that invisible, more or less invisible, tribe of all sorts of people in the background of the visual arts. At the foreground are the artists, and thank goodness we have two artists as well as practitioners in other fields to talk to us. But that is something I'd quite like to tease out. One thing I would like to say, I thought Maria's speech, and I know you do, thought it was absolutely terrific, but I would like to just mention the redoubtable Margaret Weston, a woman who was a big figure in my early career as a museum curator. She was the first director of a national museum in this country. And she was director of the Science Museum, which I thought was a damn good start. So talking of good starts, I wouldn't like, actually, I don't like doing this at all, but I want to. I don't like it. But what I want to do, and I very much want to do, is to read what Adele sent to Kate and Bromley and to Griselda, who is responding to this, and therefore I am going to add next to nothing of my own. What I'm trying to get at is
there have been waves of action by feminists bring about change based on the ongoing need to address inequalities that we can see over decades, if not centuries. In some ways, we seem caught in a cycle of recovering hidden histories of women and then losing them again. I was talking to a group earlier today about the ways I've noted this with a figure like Maud Salter, a brilliant black Scottish artist.
And if I lift my head up and talk to you, this is me, who is the subject, as I'm sure you know, of a wonderful exhibition in the basement of the gallery here. Brilliant black Scottish artist who made a huge and powerful body of work, but who always seems to be on the point of inclusion into the canon, but slips out of focus, only to be recovered again but by another wave of feminist activist researchers, curators. I feel we're grappling with a willful form of public and cultural amnesia that requires us to be perpetually rediscovering and reinstating figures who should be in the foreground of cultural memory and not always in jeopardy of being forgotten. In doing this type of work, are we forging an alternative canon or trying to adapt and modify the existing histories of art and culture? What would have to happen for us to be no longer having to use the terms exclusion when talking about women creatives and creatives of colour? Just one more example, and this refers to Adele's own role as the co-founder of the Glasgow Women's Library. In 2018, Glasgow Women's Library was shortlisted for the prestigious Art Fund Museum of the Year award. This was astonishing and newsworthy, as we were not just the first equalities-focused museum to be shortlisted, but the first Scottish museum. A year later, another Scottish museum, V&A Dundee, was shortlisted, and the press, including the Scottish Government Press Office, Nicola Sturgeon, our First Minister, had provided a video clip in support of our nomination the year before, celebrated the news by noting the fact that V&A Dundee was the first Scottish museum to be nominated. How could our shortlisting, only 1 year before, have been erased? We have Glasgow in our name. They presumably had to check through the list of past shortlisted organisations in order to make the statement. This, for me, is a classic example of the precarity of the work we all do being hidden and continually having to keep histories foregrounded, as the tendency seems to be to lose it. Now, Adele also came up with a list of points to consider, and Griselda does this so immaculately, I'm not going to report it. But in the interests of balance, just one thing I would like to add is that there is a sister organisation to Adele's, and I don't want that forgotten either. And that is the Women's Art Library, and I feel that neither of them has a title that helps, but that is a personal note. Women's Art Library started out life as the Women's Artist Slide Library, then became Make, and I think it's become the Women's Art Library again, it's not clear. But it was founded in 1976, opened to the public in 1982, and it was at first in Battersea, then Fulham, so all in London, Central St Martin's, now in Goldsmiths. And it was an artist's initiative, then it became a publisher's and an archive and an exhibition space. And it has an app, WAL. The website has a wonderful biography of another rather invisible artist who died 2 or 3 years ago, Monica Ross, who is noted for her women's postal art event. The curator of the Women's Art Library at Goldsmiths is Althea Greenan. And there have been mentions, I've made notes, I don't know where they are, but about this idea of, and I remember Rachel particularly mentioned, looking back at the histories of the Pankhursts of the 1970s. Libraries, archives are dedicated to women, are immensely important resources. We are here today, as much as we can, those of us with hair of this colour, seeking the ideas and the energies of a much younger generation. And perhaps people of my generation look back too much to archives, but I don't think you can overstate that. Those are where visibilities lie, if only you open
open those cupboards up. I think they are extremely important. May we go now to Griselda's video, which needs absolutely no introduction from me, except to say that this woman has made a lot of difference to a lot of us over the years. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm terribly sorry that I'm not present with you in person for this wonderful conference. I have been listening to it, obviously, and participating remotely, but I have to keep myself safe, and I hope you are too. I want to respond with a few thoughts in response to Adele Patrick's very interesting provocations that she shared with those of us on this panel about stuckness in terms of gender equality, amnesia and exclusion, visibility and invisibility. I do not think we are stuck, but we are finally acknowledging the failure of the liberal delusion that naming injustice will bring about its rectification because everyone agrees injustice is wrong. This delusion flies in the face of the structural analysis of race, class, gender, power structures, the deep investments in maintaining hierarchies of privilege, defending exclusion, and continuing selective access to power and any of its benefits. What has happened is at once a feminist failure to integrate sufficiently structural analysis of the systemic entanglements of the power systems of exploitation, and a neoliberal appropriation or misappropriation and resulting banalization of the least significant aspects of feminist critique and politics, namely, tell us the names of a few women artists and ask if a few more of them are getting sold. Since I won the Holberg Prize and was interviewed by print and media press, I've been constantly asked about rediscovering women artists who are forgotten and eagerly asked if we've made some progress. Then I began to reflect that it is now half a century, over 50 years, since Linda Nochlin tried to answer the question, where are the great women artists, which was what she was asked by Adela, and since Anne Gabhart and Elizabeth Brown mounted the Old Mistresses exhibition in Baltimore. I comforted myself by doing a little calculations. It took at least 70 years from 1848 or 1856 for the British and Americans to win the vote, which they got 70 and 72 years after they began. So we should not be disheartened if after only 50 years, I do not believe we've made much progress, because the issues are not just knowing a few more women's names selectively shown in blockbuster exhibitions, in utterly conventional monographic shows, without any social history, any theoretical framing, and usually trivialized or sentimentalized biographical explanations. What has not been taken on board is the meaning of feminist analysis of social systems, the complexity of cultural forms, the process of producing meaning aesthetically or semiotically. And the reason for this is that between 1970 and 2021 lies the neoliberal conservative fight back and the attack on the attempt to create a more just and equitable world and a more humane society. While we as young feminists dreamed of alliances against capitalist colonial patriarchy, the neoliberals dreamed and succeeded in offering some minor adjustments to allow women to become a more major part of the workforce, of course with lower pay, with double responsibilities for their private and personal lives, and they have to juggle their work so that they never really want to be the CEOs or at the top of the tree, which is still left to the men's club, the white men's club. And we have confused minor professional and pay concessions for the substantial transformation of the social and economic systems that we contested. The plans for social reform have also betrayed and failed us. So do not ask hopefully for progress, but also do not turn on each other and condemn us for amnesia or exclusion, in the notion that some of us weren't good enough and now everybody is very, very sensitized to these issues. Absolutely, racism disfigures all our society, brutalizes our minds, and makes us indifferent where we should be alert and open and hospitable. But it was not the feminists who failed to support the women artists of color, the queer artists, the disabled artists. It was the cultural institutions and now the real power brokers, which is the art market. Following the 2007 crash, art is a profoundly financialized investment industry. A collection such as that at Newhall is more than a body of work by artists who are women. It becomes a space for articulating what each artist woman has explored, created, and offered to the world, to a world that systematically does not value what women experience, what women think, what they feel, what they create, what they imagine, and does not understand what they endure. Without symbolic value, we have no financial value. And without financial value in this world we live in, we acquire no symbolic value. I want artist women to make decent livings. I want them to share their imaginative and critical worlds and disseminate them transformatively into a one-sided, one monogendered, mono-racialized society. But I also want to fight against the appalling cheapening of the term feminism and the silencing of our feminist thought, our huge cultural and intellectual revolution that has resonated across every discipline, from practice and fine art to the highest levels of genetics and physics. The very terms in which we try to deconstruct the patriarchal legends and their power systems are now mocked officially, and the complexity of our analysis is reduced to a few etiolated, emptied words, often used as weapons in the new linguistic social world of what I call Instagrammar, Grammar. This simplified, reduced, labeled, censored grammar creates an area of delusion in which notions of fake empowerment are produced. We need to, in this world, we need to protect ourselves and protect the complexity of art and thought, and to ensure that what women have made and how we have challenged the banalities of the museum and even academic art histories, we have to protect them and preserve them by reading them, by understanding them, by respecting what has happened in this last 50 years. We don't want to move on from it. We want to use it to create foundations for deeper and more complex structures of analysis. Yet we forget that while the impulse for change, as part of the multitude of protests against white colonial capitalist patriarchies in 1968, has been displaced by what happened after 1989. And we have been defeated. We now live in an uglier, more rapacious, more unjust world in which women, along with whole ranges of people across the world, are more vulnerable, lower paid, overworked, and still so undervalued in their fundamental rights to life that at a stroke, for instance, women's rights, as in Texas, can be taken away, women's rights over their bodies, or indeed in Afghanistan, as we've seen, a cultural revolution, political revolution can deprive them of the right to education. Our situation is fragile and uncertain, and delusions that progress arrives because we point out injustice flies in the face of the deep analysis of the systemic nature of class, race, gender, and sexual inhumanity. What matters is not that some artist women are allowed into the art market or art history and in extremely conservative, carefully managed, often banalized, if not trivialized ways that are deeply anti-feminist, even as they parade as being so. And this is only half a century late. They are arriving at a party that we have been having as feminists for the whole of these 50 years. And yet we are being lured into thinking that history progresses. We got the vote after 70 years, never got equal pay, never got adequate health services, alert to our specific needs and differences, never have achieved secure self-determination over our bodies, and let alone our minds. So my message is that we must treasure the uneven, incomplete, certainly flawed intellectual and artistic project that was post-68 feminism, why we must be critical of what is now being passed off in its banalized and weaponized forms of the correct and the incorrect. Are we stuck? No. They have resisted and made belated and limited concessions to feminist critique. Were we selective and forgetful and racist? Certainly, but not entirely so. We struggled incompletely, all of us. Are we creating counter-canons, selecting some artists and ignoring others? I think this is an impossible thing. The canon is not something we create, and it's misleading because it makes us turn against each other and about any woman who sustains a career and a practice and has incited serious critical writing. We do not want less of that. We want more of it. We want it more widely shared, and we need each other to support a project that has been created but is at risk, and not be deluded into thinking that if we just go on, it will get better. Our world has definitely become grimmer, harsher, more cruel, more exploitative. And as women, as queers, as trans folk, as all of us, as people of color, we are all at greater risk from this alliance of neoliberal capitalism and a racist patriarchy. Grim message, I'm afraid, but we have to face up to it. And yet there is hope every time we look at the creativity of women. So I acknowledge the woman behind me, which is the work of an artist called Christine Taylor Patton, who's 80 years old and still is struggling to have her brilliance recognized. Thank you.
I know that, as Griselda said, she was following last night's session online, but it is almost as if she has been following today's as well, which we know she can't have been. How brilliantly her words interlace, echo, and highlight what's been said, and what challenges. So we have to follow this. Whilst our two speakers are just catching their breaths, there are just three things that I'm not asking them to answer, but I'm throwing out maybe for questions later, and perhaps for them to look at, and starting with that reference to Christine Taylor Patton, the discovery of the old woman artist. Where have they been all this time, I wonder? Another point that came up in my mind whilst this morning's session was going on was the idea of invisibility with visual artists in particular. They are invisible. The work of art is not. And it is very different to that of the performing artist. I'm not making any greater point than that, but I would just like that to be remembered. It is the works of art that we see first. And artists don't always work in teams. However, there is an enormous background of people who support visual artists, as I mentioned earlier. And the word freelance. And that means, somebody doesn't get a salary on the whole. But it's an awkward term for visual artists. Many artists, most visual artists, do other things, and we're going to hear all about that in a few moments. But it's not that there are jobs that artists are failing to get. They sell their work, or very often they don't. Sometimes it's commissioned. Often they teach. They used to teach a lot. Now they teach a great deal less. They are in this peculiar position of being alone in the studio and then hoping to put their work in a shop. It's very different to the freelance work of a performer. And there is the problem, and I think this is true in the performing arts, well, I know it's true in the performing arts as well, is the role that they have to play alongside stars, star conductors, star film directors,
star curators. I have a bit of an obsession with the notion of the star curator, and that could be another whole conference. The important thing is the visibility of the artists, and as I said before, thank goodness, we have 2 artists to speak, and who then I think will perhaps have a conversation together. But first of all, you know who they are because you have a beautifully written small biography. But Kate, hot off the press, I now must introduce Kate Mcmillan as, so this is a new addition, artist and now senior lecturer in creative practice at King's College London. And our congratulations to you on this new role. She's also, and most significantly perhaps for the first part of her talk, the annual author of the Representation of Female Artists, from which Maria Balshaw quoted extensively yesterday, Representation of Female Artists in Britain, commissioned by Elizabeth Murdoch's Freelands Foundation. And may we hear more, please.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Jill, and thank you for everyone for inviting me and for attending today. So this is probably what you're here to hear about, which is the report that Jill just kindly introduced. But what I'd like to do to begin with is to give you the backstory of how I got to be the author of this report, because it probably reflects a lot of experiences of female artists. I actually had the reverse career of Maria. I spent the first sort of 10, 15 years of my life working in galleries and museums, working on as a director on boards around Australia, as a peer advisor on the Australia Council, which is like the Arts Council England equivalent. And actually, when I had 3 children in very close succession, I realised that I couldn't afford childcare, and childcare in Australia is extremely expensive and prohibitive. And I also didn't have any maternity leave, so I went into academia late in life, did my PhD, and now work as an academic, which is much more flexible and parent-friendly. So in my late 30s, I moved to London, and I had just finished a big commissioned piece for Carriage Works and Performance Space in Sydney, which was a 5-channel film, and I had an orchestra who'd I'd composed a fantastic piece with my long-term collaborator, Kat Hope, who champions women in music in Australia and around the world. And it was fully funded, and I had a publication, and I was thinking, great, this is the perfect time to move to London and launch my international career. I just had a big commission with the Sydney Biennale, and I was just feeling really kind of, like the world was my oyster. And so I moved to London with my then 3 very small children and my partner, and I spent a couple of months emailing about 100 organisations around the UK saying, I've got this great new work, it's fully funded, you just need to put it on, and brilliant. And I got no emails back except for one from Paul Hobson from Modern Art Oxford. He said, I can't help you, I can't support your work, but I can have a conversation with you. And he said to me, Kate, I'm just going to be really honest. You have no commercial gallery representing you. No one's going to take on this work. Who's going to pay for the dinner? Who's going to pay for the publicity? Who's going to pay for the public program? Who's going to pay for the install? Who's going to pay for the equipment? Public institutions in Britain don't have that kind of budget anymore. You will find very few artists doing big projects in public institutions without commercial gallery backing. And that was a complete shock to me. I felt so naive. I was 38. How did I not know this about the art world? Because I'd been living in this non-marketised space of Australia, where the art market really just doesn't exist, even to this day. And I had a direct relationship with museums and curators, and I didn't really have to think about selling my work or, fundraising for institutions and so on. And I felt really embarrassed, actually. But it was also just a moment where I just kind of got pretty angry, and I'd already dealt with kind of people saying to me, so are you still going to be an artist now you're a mother, and things like that. So, from lots of people. A little bit what Maria was saying last night was, it's sort of, that sort of accumulated, I guess, over 15 years of just sort of thinking, I'm going to show you. And about the same time, Listen Gallery launched their inaugural exhibition in New York by an artist who you'll all know, another old lady artist, Carmen Herrera. And they'd posted this incredible image on their Instagram, a very posed photograph of about 15 male artists, with the exception of Carmen, saying, hey, just a few of our artists at the opening of Carmen's show. And I was just like, how did this get through the PR kind of, this was 2016, right? So it's not like it was a long time ago. And I was so shocked. Anyway, Jerry Saltz reposted it and he said, hey, it's a sausage party at Listen. And I thought, fantastic, Jerry's on it. I'm going to message him. And so we had this conversation about, and then I went back to the post to see, whether it had generated any more conversation overnight, and Jerry had taken it down. And I thought, what's going on here? That's not like Jerry. He quite likes a bit of controversy. You will know that he's the New York Times art critic, and he's known for saying all the wrong things at the right times. And he said, oh, look, Listen Gallery, they do, they're pretty good. They do support lots of female artists, so I felt it was a little bit unfair. And I was like, okay. So I went to the Listen Gallery website and I counted how many artists they represented that were women. Mm-hmm. And it was about 11%. Now, of course, I've been working in the arts for 20 years. I know that the statistics are going to be bad, so it didn't come as an overriding shock. But seeing that number really sort of alerted something in my mind. And I thought, right, that's it. And I got slightly obsessed with counting every single gallery statistics in London. So about 111 at that time. And I've got a lovely infographic of it. And only about 20% of the galleries represented 50% or more women. And all the really big ones represented hardly any female artists at all. So the ones that were representing 50% or more were generally the galleries that weren't doing much business.
Yeah.
So for a couple of years, I spent time, going on talks, talking to people about that, lecturing about that in my role and so on. And then the Freelands Foundation, I happened to be sitting on a panel with Melanie Kassoff, who's the managing director of Freelands Foundation. She said, oh, we need an author for our report. Would you like to do it? So that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years, which is this. So we publish statistics that look at everything from, and you can download this if you Google Freelands Foundation Gender Report. You can download the PDF and look at all the statistics, which I can never completely properly remember. And we map how things change each year. And it's really, really interesting because, as Griselda has so eloquently said, we know this stuff. We've been talking about this for 60, if not longer. It's exhausting. We're so bored. We're saying the same stuff over and over again. But what's really interesting about statistics is that, they stick in people's heads. That, it's not anecdotal anymore. It's not like, oh God, she's having a moan again. It's real. So what we've been trying to do with the report in the last few years is really commission a series of essays to really unpick, what's behind these statistics, what's going on here, what are the kind of issues. So what we know is that at art graduates going to art school, about between 65 and 70% of them are women. And if we fast forward 10, 15 years and look at representation in commercial galleries, that completely reverses. So we're not talking about like end of life auction figures, which are terrible, then you're really looking at some terrible statistics around kind of 2% of artists at auction are women. But something really important is going on there. And if you read last year's report, you'll read a fantastic essay that we commissioned by art critic Hetty Judah, and she went and interviewed about 50 female artists and to hear about their experiences of motherhood, which of course echoed with my experiences of like what happens when my artist partner, suddenly we've got kids and everyone's buying his work because, oh my God, he's got a family to support. Whereas people are going, oh, are you still going to be an artist when they're looking at me as a mother? So that's what where we're at now is like we've got the statistics. We know that they improve by about 1% a year, which at that rate of change probably will enable us to reach gender parity in, about 100 years or so. And I think what's really different about the arts, as Jill was saying, perhaps compared with other art forms, is that we're talking about an asset class. And that's really clear. So the commercial galleries, they're giving money to institutions to show their artists. They're selecting artists that they represent on the basis of who their collectors are likely to buy. You're talking about institutions like the Tate, who have historic, valuable collections of important male artists who, arguably don't want to suddenly devalue the values of those works. So the change is incredibly slow, as Griselda said, based on its relationship with the art market. This is one of the big challenges. So I guess my argument now is, well, we know this stuff, we know the statistics. What are we going to do to change? What does best practice look like? How can we mitigate some of the effects of motherhood, of class, and so on? So in this year's report, actually, we've got some statistics on socioeconomic background and ethnicity, which will help to kind of flesh out some of those intersectional layers of those obstacles. I'm just going to keep talking, Jill. So, at any point, just,
Roundabout your next sentence would be a lovely place to move on.
Sorry, I mean, it's fine that there's only two of us because I can just talk.
Yeah, the next one, please. Thank you. Can I ask one question on behalf of all of us? What happens to that apart from it being on your website? You can download it, but you need to know it's there. So how do you know?
So Freeland's Foundation have all the historic reports on their website actually, and they can download it. I mean,
how does somebody who doesn't know about it know about it?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Does
that hasn't?
It tends to get a bit of press each year when it comes out. I mean, last year in particular, there was a really, significant discussion. We did public programs around it, and we did launches. And Jennifer Higgy wrote the other essay and talked about, women in art history. And so, within the art world, it generated a lot of conversation. But sometimes it's like that preaching to the converted.
That's what I was wondering. Anyway, thank you very much for that. So, to another very visible artist woman, to use Griselda's phrase. So, an artist and founder of Black Blossom, which I have to say is one of the best titles I've heard for a long time. It's my pleasure to introduce Bolane Tajuddin, who will talk to us, I think, about Black Blossom, but it's a wide-ranging curatorial and now educational, and probably, since I last read something else, website and platform. May we hear more, please?
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
So my name is Bolane Tajuddin. I am the founder of Black Blossoms, which started in 2015 as a conference to celebrate Black women and Black non-binary people in the arts. So I'm a University of the Arts London graduate, and at the time, I had a huge interest in politics. So I was part of the NUS students movement. I was on the women's campaign, done a lot of activism around like the hiking of the fees, just constantly like wanting to possibly be in politics, and then go into art school, and then having this like enormous sort of spiritual, I would say, awakening to the arts and the power that it can have on one's life. And then, so in my last year of university, I ran to be education officer, and I was a sabbatical officer for a year. And before that, I was previously vice president of London College of Communication. And I guess some of the statistics that I was becoming aware of at that time was the lack of POC lecturers and the attainment gap for POC students. And for me, there was a direct correlation between the amount of lecturers there were and the low attainment grades of Black and POC students compared to their white counterparts. And also stuff around there's 60% more women artists, but we have a university run by white men. So there was a lot of thinking, like I'll definitely say I was just thinking about these things, plus having to do a dissertation and also raise a young child. So I was thinking a lot. And then during my dissertation, so I'd done a public relations degree, and I looked at gatekeepers in the industry, and I started looking around feminist theory, but then really becoming entranced around Black feminism and how Black feminism has always incorporated intersectionality right from the beginning. And really, I look back at the Cohambie River Statement Collective and how when you first become awakened to like all the different sort of injustices in the world, there's this feeling of going crazy. And I remember like I was about 21, so I was a mature student, and I remember literally crying on my bedroom floor like around my dissertation and just thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going into a world that's like really racist and sexist and phobic on all different stances, and I'm not really prepared. So, and then with the task of having to tell my peers that, oh, by the way, like we might not get a first enough dissertation because there's like systematic racism. And I never really wanted to be, I didn't go to university to be an activist. I actually went to uni to just be quite, this is like really superficial, but to be popular in my industry. You know, I wanted my PR degree to open the doors for me that I possibly wouldn't be able to open. And then all of a sudden I'm on this springboard having to talk about race and racism constantly. So Black Blossoms really grew out of wanting to create an environment that was safe for me and my friends to come and discuss issues that were affecting us in society, in university. And then I had a chance to do an exhibition in the High Holborn London College of Fashion space, which is street facing, and it was with Black alumni students, Black women, Black non-binary students, and it was really successful. And then I realized that, oh my gosh, like I really love doing this. I really love curation, and but at the same time, I knew something was amiss because I knew in order to understand the industry I was going into, I needed to know the history. And that is when the collective amnesia I started to realize happened. So Labaina Himid was at Wimbledon. She studied performance there. Sonia Boyce, she was the chair of Black Art and Design. And Frank Bolin spent a stint at UAL, Sir Steve McQueen. So there's many Black and BAME artists that have gone through the doors of different colleges, even when they were separated, even together, but their university failing to platform and highlight their achievements as part of their alumni wasn't there. And then I think it was also the same year in the Baina Himid won the Turner Prize. And what I find really interesting about the Turner Prize and the Linda Not Chillin' comment is that when Linda talks about great women artists, she talks about there's no great women artists and there's no great Black male artists, but she forgets to include Black women. And if you look at how the Turner Prize, who won, so we had, I want to say Laura Whitebread, but I think that's wrong. Rachel Whitebread. Yeah. We had Rachel Whitebread win in, I think, 1997, and Chrissa Philly win in like 1998. But it took 20 years for a Black woman artist to win it. Yeah. So we have to look at that intersection of where Black women are placed within it. So yeah, I was doing exhibitions across London, the UK. We travelled and toured to like Liverpool, and yeah, it was really fun. And then I actually applied for a job at Tate, and I didn't get it, which is great, actually. Sometimes a no is really good. But I was asked to come back and devise some public programme. And I just started my PG cert at UAL, and the curator was like, oh, why don't you teach a course? I was like, okay. And at the time, I wanted to start a blog called Art in the Age of Black Girl Magic. So Black Girl Magic was this affirmative phrase that was being used across social media to highlight the achievements of Black women. And I really wanted to look at the kind of artworks that were being made at this time. So I would definitely say there has been 5-6 years of like a movement that's been really like loud for women of colour, POC women, disabled women, Black women. And I felt like we was in such a, I don't know what you call a boiling point, a bubbling point. And so I started, I wanted to start the blog, and he was like, oh, why don't you just teach it at Tate? And I was like, I hadn't even started teaching at UAL. And I felt, I'm actually feeling really hot now. And I think this is how hot I felt for the entire 9 months of the like on fire. And I remember when they publicly announced there was this course, there was like a media frenzy around a course at Tate, and they turned around and was like, we've never had this much publicity around the course. And I remember it was even in China Daily, and I was like, what the fuck? I was just like, okay. And like, it was really interesting seeing the reaction of the public to the course. And I remember we had a conversation about who we think is going to attend the course.
Yes.
And, you know, the creators were like, you know, we usually have a lot of white women attend, you know, so you might have to like really break down the language that you're going to be using and blah, blah, blah. And we opened the doors and it was just full of black women and black non-binary people. And honestly, I saw Rosa, who's here, performed in week 3, the Tools That Breaks the Master's House in the Henry Moore Gallery. And it was really such a humbling experience for me. And like, it really, again, spiritual work, life work, as to why I need to continue doing the course. And so I'd done the course for 2 years, 2018, 2019, and we were going to repeat it again in 2020. And then the pandemic happened. And I'm a freelancer.
Yeah.
And there was like, you know, we can't leave this course, but we also can't pay you. And I was like, oh, okay. Because I hadn't, you know, I had just started the research. And like, I freelanced for a number of creative institutions. And like, one by one, I started getting emails saying, really sorry, we're going to have to postpone it. Some offered me like 25% of the intended fee. But it did take, you know, I lost quite a bit of my income. So I remember I have my daughters now, at the time she was 11, and I remember sitting there and I had to do the Emergency Arts Council application, always have been denied an arts application, arts funding from ACE. And I sat there and I was just like, I actually can't like have my career be in jeopardy because I can't make money. And having to go into another industry. So I thought about ways that I could quickly make money. So many people over the years have wanted to do art in the age of Black Girl Magic. And, you know, a lot of people from international places, some people couldn't do the dates that were proposed by Tate. And it was also quite expensive because it was at Tate. Mm-hmm. So I decided to move the course online, and I done it, and yeah, made quite a bit of money. And I was like, okay. And I was like, this is a hit. This is working. But then I thought, how many times can I teach the same course online? And that's where the Black Blossom School of Art and Culture was born. And I decided to start a school that looked at decolonizing and deconstructing arts education. And the school has had over 600 students since last year. We teach courses on Black British art, art and revolutionary China, and curating Black art. We've got loads of courses planned for next year as well. But what for me is really interesting is that I don't really like to talk about diversity and what it's like being a Black person in these spaces, because I don't really understand like positioning myself like that. But what I do understand is that people want to learn about Black and POC art. They want to learn about art from women, but there is in art school, it's not happening. So, you know, why not just have these subjects happening? I just never really, I've always just felt that it's important to just talk about it and not necessarily be engaged in conversations that waste our time. I think someone said it, Toni Morrison, Audre Lorde, they talk about how we're constantly having to talk about racism, which stops us from doing the work. And the work is to just talk about Black art and how it includes in the canon, and how it, just positioning it like that. And then this year, because the school's been doing quite well, we've been able to launch the Black Blossoms Journal, which is my favorite, which I actually enjoy doing more than the school. Sorry, because I'm really inspired by the Black 80s movement and Labeina Hamid and Sonia Boyce, and they talk a lot about having people write about your work. and the importance of that. So the journal is really there. So I'm very interested in our histories, but I'm very interested in my peers now and our contemporary work and what we're doing right now and how I can make sure that we're not erased in the future. And the journal really exists as a platform for POC writers to write about POC art. And I really wanted the platform to be, I'm really inspired by Girldom, as we all know what Girldom is, and a lot of their partnerships they have created. And as soon as I started the platform, next month we've got a big collaboration with Yahoo writing about artwork of people of colour. And that's really what the school, the journal, the art exhibitions is all about. It's about bringing that visibility, because I don't think we're invisible, because I'm not invisible. I see myself, I see all the Black women in the audience, you know, I see us, I see all the POC, I see us. So if I see us, I'm not invisible. So, but it's just about making sure that we're visible to everybody.
Nothing could be a better conclusion. That was
Sorry,
beautifully said, beautifully done. Adele asked me to ask my colleagues at the end to sum up with their concerns and their positive ideas. They've done it. They have done it so well. But if you want a chance to say something else at the very end, please do. But now there must be so many things that you want to comment on or ask. And I'll just make reference again, if I may, to Adele's points. As she's not here, I wanted to bring her voice back, which was stuckness, great word, amnesia and exclusion, and I think that's sort of linked rather with the notion of archives. Naomi, and I know who you are, everybody does, but could everybody please say who they are? It really helps.
I'm Naomi, I'm assistant curator here at New Hall Art Patton. Actually, this is mainly thank you so much for such a brilliant discussion. This is probably mainly aimed at Kate. And on this issue of stuckness, a couple of years ago, I wrote an article in The Guardian about exhibitions on women artists. And basically, I thought it was quite an uncontroversial statement. I just said, it's great that we're having more exhibitions on women artists, and we should celebrate that, and visitors should support the museums and, you know, pay for entry with their tickets and show their interest. So it's on the part of everyone to kind of participate in including more women in art history. And yeah, I thought because of Guardian's readership that I would be kind of preaching to the choir, and I was struck by the overwhelming number of comments saying, no, museums should have the best artists. And this is, you know, people saying this is gender imperialism. And basically the suggestion was that women's work is of lesser value and merit, and that women are just, the reason why they're not better represented in museums and galleries is because they're worse at art. And I realised that I'm in such a bubble with who I spend time with and who I work with. And of course, a lot of people who come to the collection, they're a self-selecting group and they want to find out about art by women. But there are a lot of people out there who don't think that there's value in it. And as you said, you know, 1% change every year. And so I guess my question is, do you think there are ways of disseminating the message more widely and to the people who really have power to change it, like those directors of major galleries, and obviously amazing work has been done at Tate, but at other museums it's at a snail pace. So that's my question.
I've heard this comment very, very many times about parity, and I think it goes back to the earlier session about, you know, how we need affirmative action, right? Because I throw back that question to those people and I get them to own the fact that their position is declaring that the 65 to 70% of female art graduates are not as good. Mm. And I ask them, is that what you're saying? Mm. Because if it is, I want that on the record. Mm. If that is your position, own it. And as Maria said last night, until you've got 65% of people as employees, as represented artists, of people in your collection, until there's 65%, you are actually not representing the people who aspired to become artists. And of course, there's a question of quality, but you know, for those of you that have seen all those lovely Tate shows that Maria saw, you know, Sonia Delaunay, Annie Albers, all of these incredible exhibitions, they're not these big monumental paintings necessarily. You know, they work across costume design and textile practice and all these kinds of different art forms. We have to think a little bit differently about how we measure quality and creative work. And I think historically, women have been incredibly innovative. If you look back through art history, they've been at the forefront of all the technological developments. You know, leaving painting behind a lot of the time and just sort of like, you know, pushing the boundaries, largely because they sort of had nothing to lose a lot of the time, because they weren't getting support for those more traditional practices, perhaps. And we actually have to just kind of value those innovations rather than thinking, oh, well, you know, they didn't paint, you know. So I think it's about how we value that quality. And I absolutely believe that we need quota systems. If you're receiving money from the government, you need to be accountable. If you're not budgeting for childcare in your artists' commissioning budgets, then you shouldn't be eligible for Arts Council funding. You know, if you're not paying, I mean, the Tate's got this massive budget. There's been all this controversy about all the jobs that have been lost and redundancies and so on. But their biggest artist fee that they pay is the Devine Commission, which is about £1,000 artist fee a year. So they're asking artists to spend months and months and months and months working on a new body of work for Tate Britain without paying them adequately. Now let's have a think about who can afford to do that. It's certainly not working class artists. It's unlikely to be artists of colour. And it's unlikely to be artists without commercial backing. You know, so my feeling is that we have to think about how are the people that are filling the content of our museums, our institutions, how are they being paid? You know, there's just an absolute overemphasis. And that's why my question to Maria last night was because she was kept drawing examples of all these women in leadership positions, but they're not the artists. It's very easy if you've got an HR department to kind of put policies in place and to, you know, set agendas for gender parity. It's much harder to do when you're dealing with precarious workers. And they're the people that are providing our creative content across all art forms in this country. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting ranty.
Can I have another question? Yes, please.
I'm a composer and I'm one of you and I'm the director of music here. And when if I sort of think about the comparable world of music, where definitely there's been an awakening to the absence of visible women composers particularly and being presented. And I run a joint choir. And me and a number of the other directors of music in Cambridge have seen this as a wonderful opportunity to program and discover women composers
so much.
And persons of colour as well, whose music now. And I see it as an opportunity to rejuvenate what I see potentially a museum of composers. And I think classical music does have that sort of tendency. And so you can rejuvenate it by finding lots of composers who sound like artists that the audience are familiar with. And so I see this as a massive opportunity to discover new work and new people. I have to submit, I just don't understand the opposed version, which is seeing it as a threat.
Yeah.
And if we sort of turn that back to the arts world, given that that there's a commodity value to art, I don't understand why you wouldn't want to discover all of those other abundant talents and sell them.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, from the outside, I don't understand it. Is there any reason
None whatsoever. I
But
don't
that's
think.
Jill, your comment about the old woman. It's like,
old
oh
woman.
God, they're going to die soon. Fantastic.
That is a very, very important part
you know,
of it.
and so the commercial galleries, they hire, particularly big ones like White Cube, Gagosian, they employ curators who specifically are tasked with finding old women that are about to die
Yeah,
and
ambulance
buying up
chaser
their estate.
dealers.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I'd like to give an example of one artist who I know very well, called Anne Sutton, who's now 87. And she has worked throughout her career supporting women. She is was the leading artist working with computer-generated weaving. And therefore, of course, she isn't an artist. I mean, obviously, she's merely a maker. And she did another dreadful thing, which was to make not a lot of money, but she worked very successfully, particularly in Japan and Scandinavia, with designers in the commercial world. So another black mark against her. She set up a foundation entirely to give women their own looms and instruction in running a business. She then got bored with that and handed it over to somebody on the island of Shetland. I mean, she's really has a rather splendid attitude to life. I worked with her and reintroduced her work to the Crafts Council, who had given her a solo exhibition in the 80s. When that work came back to her studio, she phoned me. It's a long time ago when I was at the Contemporary Art Society and said, I've got my life's work coming back in a van and I don't want it. I'm giving it to you to give to museums because I'm starting again. And the reason for the anecdote is that over the last, I suppose, perhaps the year before lockdown, there was an enormous amount of toing and froing, a little bit of a bidding war between Tate and the V&A. Her work is in the V&A, but they rediscovered her. And they want her work, of course, in their textile and design collection. But the Tate, the curator of the Annie Albers exhibition in particular, pushed by a very distinguished woman collector and curator, now have discovered her as a sculptor. So at the same time, those two institutions are buying different, in other words, exactly the same work, but all from the 60s. And she at 86, she's ironic about it. And a film has just been made by her called My Bones Are Woven. And it ends with somebody saying, what are you going to do with this money? And she said, I'm finding it difficult to get up to my studio, really. It's up a flight of stairs like this. So I'm buying a stair lift, she said, and I found one that's scarlet. Anyway, any more? Yes, please.
I wondered if I could ask.
Could you, Luke,
Sorry,
could you?
I'm
Yes.
Dyson, I'm the director
Yeah.
of Fitzwilliam. And actually, I'm speaking as the head of an institute, very 200 years old, very entrenched in its values for those 200 years, and in a university which is similarly entrenched in many of those values for 200 years. I wanted to ask about the difference between new initiatives, something like Black Blossoms, and how that interplay with long-established institutions, maybe like Tate, plays out, and whether there's a potential for institutions like mine to exploit initiatives like yours, or whether, contrary, you're pushing us in the right way, and if so, how can we make sure that we're working with you appropriately, respectfully, and importantly as we move forward?
Thank you, Luke. So I get asked that question a lot. Like, usually it's about, how do you balance working with the Tate? And for me, I look at the institutions are made by people, and I have had very positive experiences with people who are usually assistant curators, the newer curators, the new crop, who want to see a change. but they are finding problems with the heads of organizations who want things to stay the same. And for me, it's always been about subversion. Yeah, there's a lot of it's quite subversive. And I think it's important for new initiatives like mine to work with, collaborate and partner with existing institutions, because it does both. For both institutions, it adds credibility to Black Blossoms. I understand how working with the Tate adds credibility to my work, but I also understand working with the Tate also disvalues my work, because it's like, on one hand, they're making all these redundancies. There's only like 0.5 Black artists in their collection. There's so much, but it's about striking a balance in. It's not that I'm a pessimist, but I'm also quite hopeful. And yeah, I'm working from the inside, the outside. Organizations like Girl Dem, Black Ballad, Babes. I'm trying to think of more art collectives, Muslim Sisterhood. I'm sure Rosa can help me out as well. I was going to say Bold Tendencies, but it's not Bold Tendencies. Rooted Zine. All of these young platforms, I think it's there's a term that I like around mentoring up. We always think about mentors as someone who's in a senior position mentoring the younger generation, but actually the younger generation are actually, we're here to help mentor your organization now into like this new world that's going to exist, whether we like it or not. That's the truth. Whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. You can argue about, for me, it's like the most ridiculous argument is gender neutral toilets, because at home, I only have one toilet. And you get what I'm saying? So, do you know what I mean? Like, and I remember when I was a SAB, like, it was an argument for like a whole year, but it happened anyway. Eventually, these changes are going to happen. And, like you said, the harder they fight is because they know they're losing. And for me, I kind of take great pleasure in like seeing the rings, and then all of a sudden there's like a halt, and it's like, okay, we concede. We're interested. And then, but I'm also aware of like the dangling carrot. I think Labena's work at Tate, she's got an exhibition coming up, and I think that work will be there. And I'm aware how institutions will like to use my work and use me as a way to deflect from their bad practices. And I hope through the school and the journal that is kind of rectified in like what the money that I'm getting from institutions is being used to. But it's a very
progress, isn't it?
Yeah, but
and you can just be used as a PR exercise.
Definitely,
yeah.
But because I studied PR, I also because I studied PR, I know I also know how to like use their tools and like my own tools to like create my own narrative before you guys even think about talking to press. I've already spoken to journalists. I've already spoken to the journalists that you're interested in. So it's very it's a balance that I look to. It's a hard balance, but it's something I can't wait to be like Black Blossoms is 200 years old and like for
Yes,
I can't
I do.
Obviously I won't be here, but I can't wait for
I wouldn't bet on that.
I would hope, but I can't wait for someone to like, because I can envision in even 50 years a young person can be like, yeah, Black Blossoms is super problematic, and I can't wait for that, I can't wait for that and the changes that need to be made in order to bring Black Blossoms into this new world.
Yeah.
For me, like, what I'm really interested in is how Black Blossoms and other Black arts organisations exist and continue to exist. And that is because we have to partner with institutions that get all the money from ACE.
You can find his email.
I'm going to find
Okay.
you.
No, any other questions, please?
I did want to touch on the point made earlier around women and mental well-being again, and periods and menopause. And I think about heartbreak a lot, and I know this is ridiculous, but I think that women, we suffer a lot of heartbreaks, and like the workplace isn't very friendly. I don't want to go into work if I've just broken up with my boyfriend. I don't want to think about art. I want to be able to pour that into the art, but I don't want to have to like deal with, and I look at, again, Girl Dem, Black Ballad, who are like set up as business organizations, and they have period days off, so women don't have to come into work when they're menstruating. They have hefty like childcare. You know, I'm excited about a lot of Gen Z creative businesses actually, because they are really, well-being is at the forefront of their like employee packages, you know, days off, working from home. And I feel like we should all be looking at more Gen Z businesses. I don't class myself as Gen Z, but I think if we look at like a lot of Gen Z businesses that are starting, especially in the creative industries, mostly run by queer women again, queer women of colour as well, there's something really exciting there about how they are, how they want their employees to thrive mentally first before the business. And yeah, that's what I'm really inspired by.
Thank you for bringing that point back. You have ended on an extremely, you've talked about your concerns, but positive note. So just to echo Adele's question, may I ask you to?
Well, I mean, is that...
I know you have done, but
yes,
again, for the end,
just so much
please.
to say, but just building on, you know, that discussion, you know, I've got 3 children, 2 of them are trans, and they're already going, Mum, what's with the male-female report that you do, you know? And so, you know, I'm reliant on institutions collecting data for this report.
Yes.
And already it feels old-fashioned and redundant, you know, so I think that we need to, yeah, as you do, look, you know, be mentored up, and my kids are always correcting me, I'm always getting their pronouns wrong, you know, and yeah, I think that there's extraordinary changes that, you know, they need to move beyond the entrepreneurial creative project though, and they need to be endemic. And they need to be, you know, I'm on the executive of my union, you know, we've got great maternity and paternity leave policies at King's, but line managers are constantly not implementing them. You know, there are things that, you know, yeah, it's about making those changes in the workplace. As we say, we don't have gender parity. The pension gap in the UK is 40%. You know, we can have all these amazing policies in place, but it doesn't mean change is going to happen. But equally, the advice that I give to young women is like, you know, don't marry an asshole. You know, like literally, because actually you can do all these amazing things in your workplace and have all these amazing policies, but if you have to come home and still participate for the lion's share of all that invisible labour, then, you know, forget it. So, you know, it's about those things that happen in public and what we can do in our institutions, but it's also about, you know, the personal is still the political, and that has not changed in 60 years, and you know, hundreds of years. Anyway.
Thank you. Yeah. I would like to thank you all very much indeed for your questions and the buzz of interest that I could sense all the time you were talking. I want to thank Adele in her absence, Griselda in her wonderful Dea Ex Machina presence absence, very visible, slightly invisible. And I want to thank, and you want to thank, our speakers, Kate Bolanley, for the wonderful things they've said. And can I echo the thanks to the college for inviting us, and I want to take the quotation that you used, for giving us the food and the chairs. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.